Will you pray for me? Lord, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It was the 26th of August, 1839, and the revenue cutter USS Washington was patrolling the waters off the tip of Long Island when the ship's commander received word of a suspicious sighting. An unknown schooner, long, low, and painted all black, had been sighted anchored off the coast. He sent an armed party to investigate. What they found when they boarded that mysterious ship would change the course of history. The ship, they discovered, was in control of a group of just under 50 Africans, Mendi Africans from Sierra Leone, to be precise. Held captive on board with them were 2 Spanish passengers. None of the Africans spoke English. None of them knew where they were. The ship's name was La Amistad. The 2 white men on board told the men from the USS Washington their version of events, and the Africans were quickly taken into custody and held in New Haven, Connecticut. The story, as pieced together from the Spaniards and from the African captives themselves, once translators who could speak Mendi were found, was this. The schooner, Amistad, incidentally and ironically, is Spanish for friendship. The schooner Amistad was full of captives taken illegally from Sierra Leone. They had been initially transported on a Portuguese ship, then bought by these 2 Spaniards. Intended for slavery in the sugar plantations of Cuba, the Africans had other ideas. They found a rusty file in the hold and used it to free themselves of their chains. Then they rose up and used long cane knives, sugar cane knives, to kill the captain and the cook of the ship and to take control. They demanded that the ship be taken back to Africa, and the navigator pretended to comply. Instead of taking them home, however, he guided them ever closer to the Americas in the hopes that they would be apprehended. They sailed for some 2 months as their food and water steadily dwindled. Then, hungry, frightened, and slowly dying one by one, they found themselves near land that they did not recognize, Long Island. The trials that ensued were not, as you might imagine, primarily about murder or mutiny, though of course that was in the mix. The question to be answered by the courts was this: who owned these people? Though slavery in the United States was legal, at that time the transportation of slaves from Africa to the Americas was not. The men who had quote-unquote bought these Africans claimed that every one of them had been born in Cuba and were therefore their legal property. But there were other claimants to ownership. Queen Isabella II of Spain claimed that they were hers. Some of her retainers claimed that they owned certain individuals from the ship. Still others thought that the men from the USS Washington should be paid, perhaps in slaves, for having salvaged an unmanned ship. And some, some, thought that the Mendi captives belonged only to themselves and to God. Former President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, was among them. He argued their defense and the case amid pressures from all sides, the governments of Great Britain and Spain among them. The case made it to the Supreme Court of the United States, who ruled finally in 1841 that the survivors of the Amistad had been captured and transported as slaves illegally, that under those conditions they were within their rights to attempt to secure their freedom by any means necessary, including violence, and that they were, in fact, free. The next year, they returned to their homes in Africa. Ho "Come to the waters of grace and freedom, anyone who is thirsty. Come buy food without money if you are hungry. Here is who is invited to drink at this table," says God. Anyone who is thirsty. Here is who invited to feast at this table, anyone who is hungry, whether they can afford milk or bread or wine or not, whether they can afford to buy their freedom or their documents or not. Here's what God said is if a nation that you do not know or members of a nation that you do not know should show up speaking Mendi and begging for help, then you better help. Do not look for me in the government, says God. Do not look for me among the crowned heads of Europe. Seek me in the slave ship, for that is where I will be found. And if I have laid for you a rich banquet in your time, then you better do the same for anyone who shows up on your shores seeking freedom. You probably already knew something of the story of the Amistad before today. There are some things you may not know, especially if what you know you got from Spielberg's movie about it in the 90s. The Mendi captives' defense, as well as their material support during the time they were incarcerated, as well as the costs of their return journeys to Africa, the U.S. government would not foot that bill. All those costs were funded by, unsurprisingly, abolitionists. The vast majority of these were Christians. Christians who took seriously the claim that when God sets a feast, everyone is invited to it, especially those who need it most and cannot afford it. And the majority of these Christians were Congregationalists, the predecessors of our United Church of Christ. The case of the Mendi captives was the first civil rights case in the United States of America, and we, Plymouth, or at least our predecessors in the United Church of Christ, we were the ones that funded and won it. Ho, come to the waters of grace and freedom, anyone who is thirsty. Come buy food without money if you are hungry. And if you are not hungry or thirsty, then you have a job to do. You better set the table and pour out for those who are. Before leaving to return home, the Amistad captives presented John Quincy Adams with a Bible. Now known as the Mendi Bible, it came with a letter that said, quote, "We are about to go home to Africa. We shall take the Bible with us. It has been a precious book in prison, and we love to read it now we are free. Mr. Adams, we want to make you a present of a beautiful Bible. Will you please to accept it? And when you look at it or read it, remember your poor and grateful clients." For the Mendi people, Boston, November 6th, 1841. In 2007, Deval Patrick, the first African-American governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, took his oath of office on the Mendi Bible. We do not know much about what happened to the Mendi captives after they returned to Sierra Leone. But the story of the American Christians who defended them does not end there. They fundraised so effectively during that time, they raised so much money on behalf of the captives that there was a lot left over when the trial was finished. These funds were eventually used for the creation of the American Missionaries Association, whose stated goals were the abolition of slavery, the education of African Americans, and the promotion of racial equality and Christian ideals. It was the first such organization to have fully racially integrated leadership. And in the decades after the Civil War, the AMA founded more than 500 schools, colleges, and universities throughout the South, more even than the U.S. government's Freedmen's Bureau. Among the schools founded by the AMA are Berea College, Atlanta University, Fisk University, Tougaloo College, Dillard University, Talladega College, Lemoyne-Owen, Houston-Tillotson, and Howard University. Ho, come to the waters, you who are thirsty. Come buy food without money, you who are hungry, says God. The American Missionary Association continued as part of the Congregational churches, and then as a mission arm of our United Church of Christ, right up until we restructured the denomination in 1999. But its work continues. Today, the monies gathered by those old Congregationalists so many years ago still form one of the largest parts of the endowment funds of our church's justice and witness ministries here at home and around the world. Come to the waters, God says. Come buy food without money. If you go to the headquarters of the U.C.C. in Cleveland, Ohio, and walk through the front doors and turn left, you will find yourself in a long, oval room. You will hear water trickling and rushing as you enter. You will look around and realize that you're not just in an oval. In fact, it's like you're in the bottom of an oval bowl. The walls rise up on either side, and then you realize that you are not in a bowl. You're in the hold of a ship. But there is not a deck 2 feet above your prone body. Above you, there is light. Shards and shards of glass filter bright, beautiful, pure, clear, free light down into the hold of this ship, which will never be closed in. It is the Amistad Chapel of the United Church of Christ. And you won't know it by looking, but the lectern in that place and the cross and the communion table are all made from the same wood as La Amistad itself. And the communion table. The communion table in the middle of that big ship's hold where our church worships week after week. If you get close to it, you'll see that it has a glass top, and if you look down through it, you will see that it's made from a ship's wheel. Like the wheel of a ship that brought the Mendi captives into slavery, like the wheel that the navigator used to betray them into the authorities' hands, like the wheel that brought them home. And week after week after week in that place, they spread there a meal that tells a story of slavery and betrayal and then freedom. And week after week after week, they spread that meal on that wheel, and they say, Ho, come to the waters. Come buy food without money. Come. So may it ever be. Amen.